Now, our next session, we're going to hone in. We've talked a lot this morning broadly about new innovations, new technologies. We're going to hone in particular now on the world of AI. And as a lot of you will know, AI could potentially significantly disrupt and change and be transformative. And we have to think a lot about how innovations, particularly using AI, are going to be developed and delivered in a way that is obviously citizen-friendly and citizen-first in the ways that we talked about in our last session. And we know AI is a technology that can change the way we live in very positive, transformative ways that make all of our lives efficient. It is not without its questions and challenges, and we will explore that also in our conversation afterwards. You're going to hear now from four incredible speakers and experts. We're going to be joined by Pádraig Dalton, John Barron, and Dr Patricia Scanlan. But first, I want you in a moment to give a warm welcome to Lena Lundgreen. And she's going to open this session and really take 20 minutes to really talk about the impact of technology on innovation. And Lena is passionate, as you're going to see now, about how technology can play a vital role in solving some of the hardest challenges that we face in the world when it comes to sustainability, skills, poverty, and many, many others. And through more than 20 years of work and experience and expertise in the technology industry, she's been focusing on how technology can improve people's life and society. She's passionate about accelerating impact with governments to support citizens and the digital transformation of countries around the world. And she does that in her role as the regional business leader for government for Microsoft in EMEA, where she's responsible for the business segment that's covering a lot of public safety and justice, public finance, public health, and critical infrastructure. And Lena is going to take you through really an incredible 20-minute overview of what AI looks like with a lot of really practical case studies that I think a lot of you will benefit from and learn from. Please give a warm round of applause to Lena. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was one of the longest introductions I ever had, I think, so happy about that. I started in Microsoft 6 years ago, and that was actually my midlife crisis. I was hoping I would get the normal midlife crisis. I could start to work out or buy myself a new motorbike or something like that, but instead I chose to work in Microsoft. Because I woke up one morning and I realized that this welfare society that we have in Europe, it's not sustainable. It's not going to last unless we make big changes. So I thought, I'm a strong believer of technology. I really think technology will play a vital part of the change we're going through. So I could find no better place to work than Microsoft. So that was my midlife crisis. And today we have heard about all the crises we are facing now. We went from COVID until a multi-crisis. And I'm not going to repeat that to you, and you're all aware of it. And we also talked about going from resilient to perseverance. That's the word Microsoft chose, and I think you have to be native digital speaking English to actually pronounce it well. But at least I know what it means, and I think Anne described it really well earlier this morning. So I'm not going to go through all of that. But what I want to say is that while COVID, we thought we have no choice. We actually have to do things. The situation is the same now. We don't have a choice now either. We have to get all through all of this crisis. And while during COVID, it was quite clear to everyone that technology played a vital part, it doesn't look, when I look across Europe, it's not that clear today. Because the situation is more complex. There are many questions we need to handle at the same time. So if you're going to remember one thing of what I say, I think it's this. We still need to use technology to solve some of these challenges. And I think the most important thing is data. In public sector today, we have enormous amount of data that we're not using. And that data could give us that insight and that information that we need to make the right decision in these times that are so challenging. So today, I will try to have a little bit of a Chinese menu. I'm not going to serve you one course and go deep into one case. I'm going to show you some smaller cases, and hopefully some of them will be a bit of an inspiration of what you are standing ahead of. And I have to say, I'm a bit optimistic because I've never been in an event before where you said perseverance so many times before it was 11 o'clock. So I'm really hopeful. Okay, so I want to start with public finance and a case from public finance. And why is that important? We have never been in a situation before where we need to make sure that the public sector have the funding they need. And today we see that a lot of the funding available is actually dependent on good revenue collection systems. So when I look across Europe and the Middle East, it's a huge priority for the countries to actually have good revenue collections. The second thing is that we more than ever also need to be agile when it comes to how we spend our funding. We see most governments across Europe are now thinking, how can we support the energy crisis? Funding that we sat in January thinking we will use the funding this way, now needs to be redistributed. So it's also important to have a good overview of the finances. And third thing is, I'm really proud that Europe, when the energy crisis came, we did not decide to slow down on sustainability. The EU actually decided we are speeding up. We're not giving up on sustainability. So the public finance area is really important both to give taxes or incentives to make sure that we reach these goals. So I want to start with a story from Poland. And in Poland, they saw that they needed a new system to make sure that they get their taxes right. So what they did, they developed a platform where if you're a citizen in Poland, you will actually get suggestions for your taxes. So you will be served with the information you need, and what you can do, you can go in and you can change data if there is anything that is not correct. And many countries have that, but what really fascinates me with this story is how the numbers improved. They estimated they actually had 70% fraud on VAT, and that was during the first 9 months reduced down to 40%. And that's a significant improvement, which helped Poland build their welfare system. So I just want to say that this is a good case, and there are more numbers, but since I have a Chinese menu, I'll move on to the next. But the impact of this was actually a lot bigger than I thought it could be when I looked at this case for the first time. Then let's move on to something we called low-code tools. And what does that mean? In Microsoft, we have some tools that are low-code that even I'm able, and I can probably see some of my Microsoft colleagues smiling about that, because when even I'm able to make an application, it's not that challenging to make an application. And we heard in the panel discussions earlier today what's important with innovation. It's important with innovation that the project doesn't get too big. You have to be able to fail. You have to afford to fail. So you can try and fail fast and move on. And these tools are an extremely good way of doing that. And there's also, I saw in your innovation plan, you have an ambition to involve people to make that innovation culture, your employees. And I think there's no better way of actually engaging the employees than if they're able to be quite involved in something that is influencing their everyday work. So I would like to share a story from Italy, where the police and the firemen and those who are out in the streets, they reported back, you know, we see a lot of things when we're out on the street. But the paperwork compared to how small these things are compared to everything else, it could be like there is litter on the street, it could be like you see here, it's a pothole in the road, or it could be something that would bring people a ticket. It's way too much. And we just have to pass it. It's not good for us, it's not good for our city that they see the police are not doing things with things that should be done something about. And someone thought, what if we could sort of take down the burden for those out in the street, actually making it easy for them? Let's try to do this in a power app. So they made this app, and the policemen, they said, we don't feel very tech savvy, so it has to be really easy for us. So they made this app, and now the policemen are out in the street. They can actually take a picture, just give a short report on their mobile device, and send back. And this was successful, so they said, okay, let's expand this. Or actually do something more about it. So they implemented those forms into their backend system. So now they can automatically be sent to those who are actually going to fix this. For example, if it's a hole in the road like you see here, it will be sent to a contractor. So it was a successful one. It actually makes the people out on the street feel better because they're contributing also on the small things. And the things are actually also fixed. Okay, moving to data platform. This is very close to my heart. I think we have so much data out there that we are not using that has a huge potential for us. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be personal data with a lot of privacy issues and those kind of things. It's a lot of services, and a lot can be improved, and a lot of decisions that can be better just by using this data. And just to give some thinking around this, one thing is we see that data is used to sort of give us a situation. Where are we today? And that is maybe not that hard. That's creating those reports, finding those data. But it can also predict what is happening in the future. And then it becomes more interesting. You know, what is happening in the future? How can we use this data? And we also see examples where people are able to engage with the citizens. They feel closer connected to the city. And last but not least, the people working in public sector can also be engaged by using some of this data. So I show you a couple of examples. So let's move to Finland, not very far away from where I lived. And they had an ambition to be the #1 leading city. So Helsinki had that. And if you're going to be the leading city, you have to move fast. So they made a strategy around their data. But when they started, they realized this is way too complicated to have one data platform for the whole city. There's too many considerations. Different departments have different interests. We move with different speed. So we're not going to succeed. So what they did was they were rethinking it and said, let's build several data platforms that can talk to each other. Because then each department can move with the speed they're comfortable with, depending on types of data, depending on the needs. So they did that. So they now have multiple data platforms that again can talk to each other. So they can easily share data if needed, but that made them speed up a lot faster. And I'm just showing some examples here on the slides, which you can see. I particularly like the one with childcare. Because if you live in Finland, your children will go to kindergarten. And I mean, the public sector knows these children exist, they know how old they are. So why do we have to fill in all these forms to actually get an invite for a kindergarten? So now instead, Helsinki proactively are providing the parents with a place in the kindergarten, and they can just say yes and no instead of applying for all this through all these forms. And then moving a bit further south to Italy. And they have also made a data platform. And that is to look at the vulnerability of the different areas in their city. And they're using that data to actually send the funding in the direction they need. And that brings me back to what I said about public finance. It's really important to be agile because they can see, and they saw during COVID, that the neighborhoods were changing. Some neighborhood that had a very stable situation became unstable, where other actually stepped up. What I really like about this platform is they decided to make it public. This is available for everyone who lives in Madrid. And they can go in and they can look at their own neighborhood, and they are actually encouraged to go and talk to the politicians. What do we have to do to make the situation better in this area? So I really like that you're engaging with the audience or with the people living in the city when you have all this data available. Okay, sustainability. When I had my first midlife crisis, sustainability wasn't a very often discussed topic. Now it is, so I'm having my second midlife crisis, to be honest. So, and I think for sustainability, if I look across Europe, there's a lot of discussion on gathering the data. Microsoft, we call it record and report. So it's a lot of action going around that. We have what we call Cloud for Sustainability, where we can do things like that. But we can not only record and report, we actually also have to make some actions, right? So I want to share one case with you, and then you can see we all moved to Carey, which is on the other side of the Atlantic. But this could also be in my hometown, because I'm grown up next to the biggest river in Norway. And we still have situations there when there's flooding. If my parents are not home, they will call me and say, Lena, can you please make sure the car gets out of the garage? Because it will be filled with water. So I think this is a topic that is relevant many places. And Carey found themselves in a situation where they were actually acting on people calling them. When there was a flooding, they would get a phone call, and then they would take an action. And this is a very simple use case, actually. They put out some sensors that gave them information. And with that information, they're able to both monitor in real time what's happening. They're able to take actions, right? They can try to lead the water in a different way. They can reroute the traffic if they know it's a road that's going to be flooded. They can inform the people living there with an SMS saying, there's a flooding coming, please take these and these actions. And they can also make sure that people living further down the river gets the information earlier. So it's a really easy way to improve the services to the citizens. And then I'm going to move to my last slide, and that is public-private partnership. Because with all the challenges we're facing, no one is going to do this by themselves. We have to make sure that we collaborate. And it is harder to collaborate public-private than, for example, private-private or public-public. But we absolutely have to do it, because that's the only way that private companies can take the risk they need to take for some of the topics that we are facing. And I saved an example from my home country, Norway, for the last. So in Norway, we have a situation where our main private sector, our main industry, oil and gas, is going to die. Gas is a little bit popular at the moment, but we know it's just a question of time. So we need to build other industries, and we also need to make sure that we support all the sustainability issues that we are facing and that we have contributed to more than many other countries. So with that, the Norwegian government said, we would like to try to create a new industry and at the same time contribute to the Paris targets. So the Norwegian government decided to do a project on carbon capture and actually not be involved in this project, but have private companies doing the job, but being there investing, taking down some of the risks. And this project is now moving forward very successfully, and we have started doing some of the capturing of the carbon, and it's building a new industry. But what is even better is that all the private companies that join this are currently working with new projects on their own. They don't need support to that, because they got to a point where they're able to build that new business. So with this, I hope you have been inspired a little bit by some of the stories. There's more to everyone, so if you want more details, please find me during lunch. And I'm really looking forward to being here listening to all the good thoughts the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was inspirational. Thank you so much, Lena Lundgreen. And we will have time for questions with Lena shortly, so do get those questions. I've seen one or two nice ones come in on Slido as well. We're going to hear from each of our speakers now. You've got 10 minutes each, and I think going first is you, Pádraig. Hopefully you can hear, there we go, mic is back. Pádraig Dalton, you're up first, Director General of the Central Statistics Office. And Pádraig's going to talk about the theme of innovating to achieve better insights by design. Please give a warm round of applause for Pádraig. Thank you, Pádraig. Well done, that was brilliant.
Okay, so good morning, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to take a slightly different tack from everybody else. And I'm going to talk a little bit, first of all, about why technology and why AI and machine learning are so important for us. So in the CSO, our job, this thing is jumping around a little bit, our job is to make sure that decision makers have the information and the insight that they need to make what are very difficult decisions now. And there goes, oh, it's off here. So that evidence-based decision-making is the key of everything we do. But we don't just compile evidence for policymakers. We also compile evidence for non-governmental organisations and for the private sector. The likes of multinational companies don't just decide to invest in Ireland on a whim. They use evidence, they use hard evidence to make their decisions. The second thing, of course, is that people have a right to live in an informed society. I mean, they should have access to the same level of information so that they can make their own decisions and they can hold decision makers to account. But it's also primarily to be a counterfactual to things like fake news and alternative facts. And if any of us kind of think that that's not that big an issue, I think all we have to do is look at experience internationally, and you can see how quickly fake news and alternative facts can take hold in a society and how debilitating it can be for democracy and for a society. So I think that's really important. And of course, the society and the economy we're trying to measure is changing dramatically. We have a very complex society in Ireland to measure because of things like globalisation and digitalisation. It was also a very, we've got an evolving social society. I never thought that 5, 6, 7 years ago the CSO would be thinking about how to measure things like gender identity, sexual orientation. So things move quickly and you have to move with it. So I think that's really the burning platform for us. And I think David Maloney mentioned something this morning, that it's not just COVID has brought around change. We've been changing and evolving for quite a long time, and I think it is important for us to reflect on that. Innovation hasn't just started with COVID. There was a lot of innovation before COVID, but we've seen an awful lot of change. There's a huge demand, a huge change in the demand for evidence and insight now. Decision makers want that information, they want it more frequently. So what was previously looked for annually, or they wanted quarterly, or they wanted monthly, or actually increasingly they wanted weekly. At the minute we're producing weekly reports for different parts of government on the situation with the Ukrainian crisis. So that's a big change. The timeliness, they want it much faster. And the granularity, in other words, the level of detail. It's no longer good enough to have information at state level or provincial level or even county level. Nowadays you want evidence, and you want independent, objective, high-quality evidence right down at small area level. So that's really important. We've made an awful lot of changes to the sources we're using, and it's this sources piece, I think, is really important for us when we think about machine learning and artificial intelligence in our environment. And I suppose it's changed our processes. It's led to new products from the CSO, and it's also obviously led to new services being delivered by the CSO. So this is why machine learning and artificial intelligence are important for us. Traditionally, the CSO produced statistics, and actually I use that word statistics because statistics is different from information and insight. Statistics, data is data. Evidence and insight is brought around through visualizations, through contextualizing the data, presenting it in an accessible and digestible manner. And traditionally, we would have used just primary data sources, and the census population is the prime example of a primary data source where we collect the data. But now increasingly, almost 60% of what the CSO does is based around the linkage and integration of multiple sources. So we use administrative data sources, and John is here. John would be one of the biggest providers of administrative data to the CSO, revenues data, education's data. So administrative data is the data held by the civil and public service as a whole. And there's a whole, like we're sitting on a gold mine. I think, Lena, you're right, we're sitting on a gold mine of information, but we actually have to start drilling into it, and we need to get the miners working and mining it. Private data holdings are going to be really important, and I think particularly for that timeliness piece, that real-time piece. But actually, admin data is really improving, and things like the PMOD data source that Revenue produce, it's almost a real-time administrative data source. So the data sources we're using are evolving quickly. And the last piece we use is public data holdings. And that's data we can access on the web through web scraping, and we've done quite a bit of that in recent years. But we don't think anymore about individual or silos of data. We think about the data ecosystem, and we think about the linkage and integration of all this data across the ecosystem. And we think about linking it particularly with the geospatial data system, so that we can visualize and bring the data to life so that it's easy to get the core messages. Of course, you have to do it in a safe way. And of course, you've got the data governance, and data ethics is really important now as we move into the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So what are the opportunities for us? One of the opportunities is a thing called data stewardship. And effectively, data stewardship is about the systematic implementation of common data standards right across the civil and public service. So David Maloney mentioned the national data infrastructure, which was developed by the CSO as a concept, came from within the CSO. And there are three core elements. There's the PPSN, your personal identifier. There's your air code. And then for businesses, there's a unique business identifier. Now at the minute, about 84% of all civil and public service data holdings have the PPSN, but only 57% of them have the air code. So you can have the best technology in the world, you can have the best models, you can have the best algorithms, but if you don't have the data piece right, if the underlying data isn't there, it's going to limit the potential and it's going to limit the value you can extract from that data, and that's a really important piece. And that's where we're trying to look at things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to try and fill some of the gaps. We're increasingly looking at new technologies, big data, open source. We're moving towards open source tools to try and access data, visualization. Data rooms are simply a safe environment where we can provide all of you with access to research data that you can use to inform your decisions. And I think the last piece we need to think about is the skill sets, because we're now operating in a very complex environment. So it's no longer about just data analytics. I don't like people talking about data analytics in isolation from data science and data engineering. It's a bit like a football manager saying he's going to play with 15 forwards, no midfielder, no defender, and no goalkeeper. It doesn't work. So we have to take a holistic view to all of this. And there's a whole range of skill sets we need to develop. So what we're doing in the CSO around AI and ML, and it's kind of an evolving piece across the official statistical system and globally. So the CSO is going to be working with Europe, with Eurostat, and our colleagues across Europe to lead some work. We're doing an ESSnet project on artificial intelligence, machine learning. But what we've done so far, obviously, is driven by the fact that now we're operating with very, very complex data sources, but they're very, very large data sources as well. And so the old ways of engaging that data and using that data, they have to change and they have to evolve. We need a new technological environment. We need new algorithms so that we can process the data efficiently and effectively, so that we can provide the data in a timely and effective manner. We're using it a lot to try and take away some of the manual labor, some of the manual process that we would have traditionally have. And we're trying to automate as many of those as possible with machine learning. We're using it to kind of make sense of unstructured data. And so one of the things we're using it is to try and look at unstructured text data and try and turn it into something that we can use for data analytics later on. We're using it for modeling in our business statistical area, and we're using it to support the creation of synthetic data. We're using it in the maritime statistics area, where we're using a big data source to provide more timely and more granular data around shipping. And of course, we use it during the crisis, during the COVID crisis, to provide timely data on mortality. And you might say, God, that should have been straightforward. But in Ireland, it takes 3 months. You have up to 3 months to register a death. And if their coroner is involved, it can take 12 months or beyond. And therefore, we weren't in a position using administrative data sources to provide timely data. So we engaged in web scraping. We were web scraping RIP.ie, just as an example. And of course, we had to write algorithms, et cetera, to do that. So there's an awful lot of work there, and things like the AIR code and the NDI are really important. And gaps in the NDI are a real problem, and sometimes we have to try and reverse engineer using machine learning to try and fill some of those gaps, particularly on the AIR code side. So look, at final observations from me, 10 minutes goes quickly. Better data evidence supports better decision making, okay? And I think that all of you are involved in decision making. And we're sitting on a gold mine of data, but we need to turn that data into evidence and insight. Technology, ML, etc. can help us with that. It's a complex environment, and the insights we need to get now, they're no longer available in one data source. So the challenges around climate change, around housing, around healthcare, the evidence can't be just on, let's say, on the housing side. The data that's needed doesn't just exist within the Department of Housing. We have to start linking and integrating data sources right across the civil and public service. And that requires us to have the national data infrastructure in place. Technology is really, really important. But my key message here is technology and ML and AI, it's only as good as the underlying data. We have this saying in official statistics, rubbish in, rubbish out. So if the data isn't of good quality, you've got a problem. So again, it's this kind of a holistic way of looking at things. I think we need to be careful about just talking about data, about technology and new methodologies like AI and ML in isolation from talking about the need to continually improve and address the quality of the underlying data. So sorry for being so quick, but that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Well said. Thank you, Pádraig Dalton, who's the Director General of the Central Statistics Office. A theme I think we've already heard this morning, clean, quality, consistent data. Point is very well taken. Up next is Dr Patricia Scanlan, who's the AI Ambassador for the Government of Ireland. And hopefully, as part of her talk, Patricia is going to help demystify AI for all of us in the audience. Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks, Anya. So as Anya said, I'm the AI Ambassador for Ireland. I've been in this space of AI I'm an engineer, and I've actually been in the space for about 25 years. So I've seen quite an evolution of AI and seen it in the real world more and more, and it's just, the trajectory of it in the last 5 to 10 years is phenomenal. So it's really important, we can talk about how much AI is out there already, but we can also talk about the fact that it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I want to make sure I stay in time. I could talk for a while on the subject. But one of the things I like to talk about is the idea of demystifying a lot of people, what it is and what it isn't. It's very important to dispel myths and address the real risks so that we get widespread adoption. The idea is to talk about it in a way that's real and people can actually connect with. So one of the ways I like to do is to talk about, okay, what's the definition of AI? And AI can be defined, one of the definitions is the ability of a machine to perform a task that would normally be performed by a human or requires human intelligence. And that sounds like quite a good, reasonable definition for most people in AI and outside of AI as well. But the two issues I have with that is that, for one, it kind of equates AI to human intelligence. And immediately, for those not in the area, sometimes people jump to the, HAL 2001: A Space Odyssey, or slot in your favorite Hollywood blockbuster where the robots take over and they kill humanity because we're all destroying it. And that's honestly a real fear. Like, it's a real fear in a lot of people. It's a real fear in the public, people who don't know much about it. So we've got to be careful how we talk about it, because that type of AI is actually called generalized AI or complex AI. And it's not here yet. It's not even close. People may talk about sentient AI and stuff like that, but talk to any expert in the space and they don't believe it's possible in the near future, and some people don't believe it's even possible in our lifetime. That's up for debate, but most people will agree it's not what we're talking about today. The technology we have today isn't even capable of doing that. So what we do have today, though, is very powerful, but it's very powerful in a very limited way, in the idea of what we call narrow AI. And narrow AI it's deep, but it's brittle. So you can train it, it can learn many things, it can perform many tasks, but you can't just take that system and expect it to learn something else. If you train it on voice and speech and language, it's not suddenly going to interpret images. It's not suddenly going to be able to do something in medicine. You take it even from an industry, and you can't just automatically redeploy the same models. You actually need to relearn Bring in your experts, learn the data, learn the labeling, different types of models are more appropriate, different outputs. There's so much complexity in what is required that it isn't translated very well. And when people begin to realize that, it makes us all be on the same page about what are the risks, and the real risks, because there are some, right? And these are the ones we should be talking about. And moving away from, because to be honest, a lot of time, even in the media, if I'm ever doing interviews or podcasts, people love to talk about that stuff. But what about the robot that takes over? What about this? When what we really need to talk about is the stuff that the EU AI Act is addressing, companies are addressing today, because there's a lot of real fears about that too, and let's get the conversation back on that. A good example of why that definition isn't great as well is the fact that it equates it to human intelligence, AI, but in actual fact, AI can actually surpass what we can do. And that's really important as well. And a good example is, I founded a company called Soapbox Labs, and we do speech recognition for children. But what we do is we do it and we license it to third parties. They integrate it into their products and services, and that's great. One of the products that they're doing is on fluency. So what the AI system is doing is performing a task that's normally performed by a teacher, which is reading assessment, fluency assessment. And that's great. And it's taking the task away from the teacher. The teacher would normally spend 15, 20 minutes per child in a class that can take more than a day, and they don't get to do these assessments very often because they don't have the resources. And we all know they're not suddenly going to get 2 teachers in every classroom. So the AI system does that task. But what the AI system is now, what we're building now and it's about to be released, is actually a feature that is not possible for teachers to do. It's long been held that intonation, you know, the prosody, that rhythm, that beat, that which people read at or speak at, is a real good indicator of fluency. But no teacher can assess my rhythm. You couldn't assess my rhythm right now. You may say I'm speaking fast or slow, but you couldn't put a number on it. And therefore, if you're assessing all of us, you couldn't actually compare us very easily. But a computer can do that really easy. And through that, we get objective measurements that actually the teacher was not able to do. So sometimes the things we've created are because we've created them with the limitations of human intelligence in mind. So once you kind of start breaking apart that, you go, okay, we know we can replicate human tasks, but what else can we do? You know, the computer can hear better than us, right? That's just a limitation of the sensor and the microphone. It can see better than us because, you know, that's the limitation of the camera and the granularity. AI systems can see patterns that we cannot see and we couldn't possibly process. You know, even if there was 1,000 of us, each individual person would be able to make those connections that an AI system can. So when you think about those definitions, we're not actually using the right definition to convey the power and the limitations of AI. And getting those right is really important. So when we talk about the stuff we should be talking about AI, and what the EU AI Act covers is around, we talk a lot about data and you know, rubbish in, rubbish out. The important thing is to get real data, and I would advocate not just for lots of data, I would advocate always for diverse data, real world data. Sometimes it can be a little dirty. Sometimes it can be a little, you know, we do audio data, speech data. We actually want the mistakes. We want the background noise. In an image, you want the shadows. You want the stuff because that's what it's going to actually produce in the real world. And if you build a system that is built on data that isn't reflective of the real world, you're going to end up with problems. So, you know, cautioning against that too. A lot of the issues that the EU AI Act will be around data governance. So it's not just taking on the data privacy, it's also how is it handled? Is it being used for the purposes that were originally laid out? Has the data been held securely, safely? Once the AI model, so that's like the data layer that I think is going to be talked about, and it is so important. And that's even before you do the AI models. I mean, I spent nearly 2 years thinking and building the system at which we collect data before I ever hired our AI engineers or anybody to actually process the data, because figuring out that piece of the puzzle is huge. And it's huge in everything. And that's the challenge I know government are going through right now, is how do you take that treasure trove of data and actually make it useful and available to actually capitalize on the intellectual property you can build and the optimizations you can do with that. What you need to be able to do once you build your AI models is to be able to have it traceable and understandable and transparent. And transparency can mean letting somebody know that they're talking with an AI bot, that they're not being deceived into thinking it's a human. But also, if it's making a financial decision about a loan or some kind of impact on someone's life, that they can actually come back and ask, well, how did you arrive at that decision? Why did I get that grade? The system, the days of AI being a black box, and it's like, oh, date in, date out, and it's all a black box, are gone. We're not going to be allowed to do that, and we shouldn't be allowed to do that. A lot of old AI systems where everybody's like, oh, I don't know, I just put it in, that was the answer, like the AI system did it. That's not good enough. The idea of bias and discrimination and fairness. Again, a lot of older AI systems, and I say older, I mean, AI's been around for a couple of decades, and a lot of it has been built 10 or 15 years ago. Again, the Stanford University came up with a study about a year and a half ago that was published in the New York Times, where they actually exposed Siri, Alexa, Google, all of them, on average, were performing 35% more errors for black voices over white voices. There's just been discrimination in products pulled because of bias in image processing, not being able to do the skin tones because the original data, the original approaches, it's not even the data, it's how, if you were dealing mainly with white faces and you actually developed algorithms off that, you actually probably didn't need to worry about skin tone because that wasn't an issue. You were probably more worrying about features. How it was built is a real problem. And a lot of times, some of these legacy systems, these older systems, it's actually very hard to fix them because they've been there for so long and they've been evolving, and often the people who built them in the first place have moved on. So any time we need these systems, we want to use them in the future, you've got to use the systems that can be accountable and are prepared to open up and show how they arrived at those decisions. We have issues around safety, security, fairness, sustainability. All these things are important. And going forward, if you keep the idea of the human at the loop, you bring all the stakeholders together when it comes to how a system is going to be used. You can wring it out, I think we talked earlier just among ourselves about how just running a good software process, it's not that different to come up with an ethical, trustworthy AI. The problem is rushing something to market. The problem is not caring about the human at the center of this. Because all the systems, there are many, many ethical and trustworthy AI systems out there, and there's many that are not. And sometimes, you wouldn't throw up a building without foundations and doing the compliance and the regulatory stuff. There has been a lot of pushback about AI systems in the world that we don't want to have to comply with all that stuff. We need to innovate, we need to move fast. You can do both. It's just being thoughtful and mindful about it. So addressing the real fears that people have that the AI system can be biased, well, it can if it wasn't built thoughtfully. There will be examples of systems out there that do all this properly. And it's just important that we find those, and they're the ones that bring, and we apply those to the innovations that society can benefit from. So I think I'll leave it there, so thank you.
Super, thank you so much, Dr Patricia Scanlan, AI Ambassador for the Government of Ireland, for breaking it down and showing just the nuance, the possibilities, but also just for us to continue to be guarded about the complexities of it all. So thank you for that. And do keep questions coming in via Slido. Our last presentation before we go to questions is from John Barron, who's the Chief Information Officer for the Revenue Commissioners, and he's going to take us through some practical examples of how AI has been used to simplify projects and improve responsiveness to the public. Thank you, John. Give him a round of applause as well. Go on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And just to follow on what Patricia was saying, the slides aren't up yet, are they? No? So, okay. So AI, as has been outlined, it's a spectrum of technologies. And I think this picture captures it very well. And at the far end, we have HAL. HAL doesn't exist yet. So we're down at the bottom end. We're down starting on things like robotic process automation or intelligent automation, and then moving into cognitive intelligence, where we start doing predictive decision making and stuff like that. So it is a spectrum, and I think we're really down on the left-hand side here, maybe moving a little bit into the middle, and that's what you need to bear in mind. So it's still embryonic technology. So just in revenue, just on the basic stuff, on RPA, or robotic process automation, that allows you to configure computer software in a way that it it actually automates things that people do. And it can actually take processes and run them intelligently for you. As a bot, that's typically what they're called. It's a bot, so you can spin up a bot to do something that a person would normally do. And it gives you an opportunity to get some great advantage from investments you've already made in technology. So what we've done in revenue, and these are a couple of examples. Obviously, we were very busy over the last while. We introduced PAYE modernization, or PMod. And as part of the preparation for that, we had to clean up our system. We had to make our data better. And one of the things we found, there was a big anomaly in our data around the marital status of people. Because if you're married, obviously credits can be apportioned between the husband and wife, and it can work out better for you from a tax perspective. But the actual process of updating someone's marital status is not straightforward, because there's all sorts of things have to be taken into account. And there's up to 280 steps involved. So it could take a caseworker 3 hours to do one case. And we found that we had a backlog of about 21,000 records needed to be cleaned up. So that would have taken quite an amount of time. We reckoned it would take 35 FTEs about a year to clean that. So we built a bot, and we got the bot to do it. And the bot was able to do basically 100 an hour. And we cleared that 21,000 backlog before we went live, so Pádraig got us clean data, which is very important, and we got a much cleaner file. And more importantly, the taxpayers got the tax treatment that's appropriate to them, bearing their marital status, taking their marital status into account. And we can still run that bot. We don't have to run it all the time. We run it every so often. And in 2021 there, we had 4,000 cases we had to clean up. The bot just looked after them. And in 2022, so far this year, it's only had to do 1,000 cases. Because it's all about maintaining the quality of your data. And as part of that exercise, we cleaned up some of the processes around taking in the data. Brexit has been quite a ride for us over the last couple of years. And one of the things we've had to do there, obviously, is deal with a lot more paperwork, because the UK have now left the EU. And some of the imports into the country have to be checked, not just by customs, they have to be checked by the Department of Agriculture or the HSE. So if there's animals involved, or food produce, or any sort of medicines, they have to be effectively customs checked by Agriculture and the HSE. And instead of having a manual process, which is what was there originally, we built a bot to handle it. And we linked the bot to their processes. So basically, they were emailing us in clearance messages. And the bot now handles all of them. And you can see the numbers, about 100,000 in 2021, 70,000 so far to date this year. And it does that in about 4 seconds, where previously that would have taken certainly minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes for somebody to process. So these are RPA examples. We have lots of others. They're relatively straightforward to set up, and there is technology available on a deeper framework that you can use to actually implement this stuff. Any of you that have used your online revenue account, we have a thing in it called My Inquiries. So rather than ringing us up, because you can never get through on the phone, you can send us in effectively an email. It's actually an online form, and you could submit a query. So we call this My Inquiries. And we had this system, and we had a drop-down menu to help us route the call to the appropriate part of revenue. So not very customer-focused, it was more revenue-focused. So you tell us who in our department should be working this query. So tell us where it is. And this list actually goes on beyond the bottom of the screen there. And then some of them have sidebars. They drop out, they drop out. So we had a lot of calls being misdirected, which meant that the turnaround time on them was slow, because it went to the wrong area, then it had to be rerouted to somebody else, and there was all sorts of delays as a result. So what we decided to do was, look, we can use AI here. So we implemented auto-routing of My Inquiries. So the screen now, just type in what your query is about, and we use AI technology to actually understand what you're saying, and it's got 98% accuracy. It'll route it to the right part of revenue so that you get your query answered much more quickly. So it's using an AI engine in the Google platform, as it happens in this occasion, just to deal with that query. And again, the volumes coming through here are hundreds of thousands. It's not 10 a week, it's hundreds of thousands a month. So it's been a really successful implementation, and we're hoping to expand that out to other parts of our kind of online services. And we've just released a chatbot, kind of a similar type of idea. Again, it uses AI at the back end to understand what are you trying to figure out here. Our ROS system, which is really for business taxes, uses a thing called a digital cert. It's for validation and authentication and non-repudiation. It's a really important legal thing. But a lot of people have problems with their digital cert. They lose them, they expire, they forget the passwords. And we're coming up to what we call the end of pay and file season. So income tax filers have till the 16th of November, if you're one, to pay your taxes, and you have to do it online. And what do you do if your digital cert is missing or you've lost your password? Well, the bot can help you here, because we were getting thousands of phone calls through our Ross help desk around this particular issue. So we built a bot, a chat bot, and it basically drives you down through a decision tree, but ultimately gets you to type in some things, and it'll converse with you in natural language and give you ideas as to what you need to do. Now, ultimately, you may still have to contact us, but it will deal with a lot of the normal kind of issues that people hit. In the first week, we had something like 3,500 accesses to this service, and we'll expand this out further. It's called Iris, by the way. Iris was the Greek god for the Greek god for the messengers, but it's actually the Irish Revenue Interactive Service. But we just thought Iris sounded good, and that's what it looks like. It drives you down through that kind of screen. And I'd like to welcome Matthew. This is our virtual digital assistant. Matthew, the patron saint of tax officials, okay? In case you didn't know. So we decided a couple of years ago we wanted to look at AI technology, and we wanted to try and do something in the natural language processing space. So we're looking around for a suitable use case, and we have a part of our organization that deals with tax clearance. So if you want to get a public contract, you have to have tax clearance. So revenue have to say, yeah, you're okay to get a public contract because you pay your taxes. And there's a couple of other instances where you have to have tax clearance. And the call centre was handling about 60,000 calls a year just on this particular subject. And it was mainly around things like people's tax clearance had expired, or maybe they were refused tax clearance and they wanted to talk to somebody. So the reason we picked it as well was we didn't specifically need any level of authentication over the phone. We could just deal with a caller on the phone. We didn't need to know specifically who they were. And there's particular technical reasons for that. So it uses speech to text, natural language processing, and speech synthesis, all in real time. And it's quite a complex little beast. And this is just a picture of it. See, I work in IT, so we always like these kind of technical pictures. But just to show what is involved in this, there are multiple AI engines involved. So the first thing we had to do was to get our Cisco phone system to take the inbound call and convert that up into text that we could send up into the cloud. And we first had to send it to a Google engine in the cloud, because we found on examination that particular Google engine was the best at kind of turning it into text that could be understood. We then sent it on to IBM in the cloud, IBM Watson, which then looked at what was the query about and actually synthesized the answer back, which sent it on to Amazon in the cloud, because Amazon in the cloud had the best natural sounding voice to go back to the customer. And then it connected back to the phone system. That was all happening in real time when the person was on the phone. So there's a lot of moving parts in there that we had to get working. But that's just to show you there's a level of complexity here that you need to be aware of. This stuff is, I think as Patricia said, it's standard IT stuff when you get down under the covers. But it's complex. And we delivered a conversational chatbot. It's integrated into our telephony system. It's also integrated into our back-end systems, because it can actually look up your tax record in real time to see, well, you didn't get your tax clearance because you owe us money or you haven't sent in a tax return. So it was able to then send that back as an answer to the customer. So a fairly integrated system. The authentication, as I mentioned, is very light touch. We found that the AI wasn't very good at certain things. Couldn't really, it could handle the PPSN to an extent, but things like address fields actually it found difficulty with. The number of the street, it had some difficulty with that. So that's why we just had a light touch authentication and it's a date of birth challenge. And we then kind of prompted the customer, because a lot of the time the customer didn't know that they were talking to an AI engine, and they wanted to talk about the dog eating the form, and could you send me out another one, and isn't it a lovely day, and all that sort of stuff. Real Irish, but we didn't really want to go there. We wanted to just get in, get the subject dealt with, and move on. And it's working, it's still there. It doesn't handle huge numbers. Of the 60,000 a year or so calls, it's handling maybe 20,000 a year. But it gave us a big learning experience. We learned a lot from it, and again, it's set the tone for the future. And there's an artificial intelligence awards conference every year in London called CogX Awards, and we built it with Accenture. Best AI product in government in 2019, Revenue won that. So, you know, we've done something right, I suppose. Now, considerations of AI. AI is like any other ICT discipline. It requires analysis, it requires planning, there's development involved, there's testing, and there's testing, and there's testing involved, particularly if you're putting out anything out public-facing. There's an operational element, and then, like anything else, there's ongoing maintenance. And my little puppy there in the corner, remember, this is not just for Christmas. You build one of these things, you're going to have to mind it, and you're going to have to maintain it. And that's where the cost comes. That's where the effort comes. You have to retrain models. You have to update the software. You have to apply patches. It's ongoing. So it's like any other ICT project that you'll deliver. The other thing you need to remember is AI is mostly cloud-based. So your data is going to the cloud. Now, is that okay from an organizational point of view? Are you happy that you're sending your data up into the cloud to be processed up there? Or you're storing your data up in the cloud? So again, you need to be aware of that. You need to prepare for that. And then procurement, right? Procurement on this is not straightforward. Because you're buying services off the likes of Google and Amazon and Microsoft and IBM and whoever else, you have to have contractual arrangements in place. And guess what? Procuring cloud services in the public sector is not straightforward. It is just not straightforward. And it is complex. So there's a bit of work probably needs to be done on that. Natural language processing itself is difficult. There's a lot of work to be resolved in it. The other thing is it doesn't support the Irish language. Or it probably can support the Irish language, but certainly the models or the services that are out there at the moment do not support the Irish language. So you probably can't make this available as an Irish language service. So again, as an organisation, you have to think about that one. I mentioned the ongoing maintenance. You'll need a concept of knowledge engineers in your organisation to deal with this stuff. And I think we've mentioned ethics. There's inbuilt bias that we all have. You have to be aware of that, particularly as you go down the road of doing some more sophisticated stuff with AI. And as with a lot of ICT, skill shortage, really difficult to get people who have this. Not just within the public service, even in the private sector. There's a skill shortage of people who know this stuff, and this stuff will cost money, and it's an ongoing thing. So you need to be aware of that if you're going to develop AI services into the long term. But, in many ways, it's no different to AI or to ICT. AI has a really important role to play. It's probably got some niche applications, but again, I think, as Pádraig said, the data is really fundamentally important here. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. John Barron, Chief Information Officer for Revenue Commissioners. Thank you, everyone, for wonderful presentations. Lena, having listened to your three fellow speakers, you came with lots of great international examples. You've heard from three Irish reference points and case studies. How do you think we compare internationally, what we're doing, what we have more to do of, like where the potential lies maybe?
Well, I guess I have to say some things I'm sure I get out of the country after the afternoon, but No, I think the examples that has been shared is really, really interesting, and particularly around tax, which we work a lot with. I think it's interesting. So, I think maybe Ireland is the same state as many other countries, right? There are pockets of excellence, but there are also some areas that haven't started yet. So I think it's you obviously have the potential. I mean, you are from European view, you are a tech-savvy organization. You have a lot of competent people, and you have sort of the infrastructure in place to succeed. So then I think it comes down to culture and how much do you dare to do and how do you want to move forward. So I know your plan has also a lot around the innovation culture, and I think that's a really important area to focus on.
Okay, that's great. Good to hear. Pádraig, I wanted to ask you about going back to data. You talked about like we're sitting on a gold mine and we have to get mining it, but there's inconsistencies then when you look at things like air code records, and then we need the PPS numbers and we need the UBIs, and for all of that to be there consistently and then link it between departments. Like, what needs to happen to get to a level of sophistication with that joined up data that we can do better modelling and forecasting, going back to where we started this morning when it comes to population trends, housing, etc.?
I think the starting point, obviously, is we have to see the value of it. I mean, you're not going to do something, you're not going to invest in something that you don't see the value of. But I think that, you know, for a lot of us, we saw during COVID how data was really important and how real-time data was important. And actually, I use the word data, but actually it's evidence and insight. And our ability to compile that type of evidence and insight in a timely manner, and also to provide evidence and insight that's objective, it's impartial, it's accurate, it's robust. That means we have to put a real focus on the data piece. And we are making progress. I mean, it's not that long ago that the air code coverage rate was down at 20%. I think it's about 2.5 years ago. I think one thing we got from COVID was so many people were buying online, everybody became aware of the value of the air code. You know, people were buying online, you had the DPD trucks or whoever else, they were dropping parcels at your door because of your air code. So I think, for me, I think it's just that piece of seeing the value. It's about recognizing, actually, that we are sitting on a gold mine of information. There is a lot of data there, but the data has to be structured in a manner that you can engage with it in an effective and an efficient manner. Mm-hmm. And I still think we're on that type of a journey. Some of the data, like there are fantastic pockets of innovation. There's some fantastic, really, really good practices and good pockets around the system. But it's not systematic yet. And I think we all have to step back and think about, like, how are we going to use our own data? And is our own data fit for purpose? And I think that that's really one of the starting points you have to think about, is how am I using my data? And I think that's very clear from John's talk. Like, John has looked at you know, revenue have a very like the CSO. They collect data to assess if somebody has to pay a tax or not. We collect data to extract evidence and insight, but actually some of the processes underlying it are actually quite similar. And our focus is about making sure that that data is of a high enough quality that we can provide data and evidence that's fit for purpose.
Thank you for that. Patricia, one of the things I wanted to pick up on was you rightly calling out the fact that media headlines can cause a little bit of fear-mongering when it comes to AI, particularly when we talk about the robots are coming to get us. But there can be sometimes real fear for people in their own jobs about job displacement. But to counter that, we probably have to get better at talking about the new jobs of the future, the productivity, the better incomes, the better skill sets. Is that where we have to kind of go on a journey? There's a narrative shift that has to happen. So that across the public service, we talk about trust with the public, but there's a trust that has to be embedded for people to embrace this type of transformation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what I've noticed, and particularly in this role, that I'm having lots of interesting conversations across the country. On one hand, you're having the conversation about AI displacement, and the other conversation is AI skills. We don't have enough people. I don't know if people remember the late 90s, before Y2K, and it was before Y2K, but just in general, there was the dot-com boom before the bust. We didn't have enough software engineers. I mean, I was, 97, fresh out of college. I got paid a stupid amount of money because I had an engineering degree, and they were like, "Oh, you can do software too, right?" And I'm like, "Okay." It was that kind of almost clamoring to get anybody into it. And what happened around then, which is really interesting, is we started retraining people. So I had a software engineering background, you know, and wanted to start doing software, and that was fine. But we were taking people from business who had a want to get into software. We were training people on 3-month courses, 6-month courses, 12-month. Half our department were coming in that way around that time. And I'm kind of seeing that sense of urgency. So the fear of AI jobs being taken away, but the multitude of conversations about an AI skills gap. And a really important thing to realize about AI is not everybody has to be a data scientist to help in the AI system. I mean, you guys know all about the data problem. There's people required in data acquisition, data cleaning, data processing, data annotation. You know, there is any number of, I wouldn't say unskilled, but less skilled. Not everybody has to be a mathematician or an engineer to get involved in this. I mean, we're seeing AI in, you know, fintech, fashion tech, climate tech. You know, I mean, you're seeing, and in every case of AI, you need experts in the field that are not technical. So when we sell into the education field, we need to liaise with AI experts as well as the education experts, people who understand education. Because you take an AI engineer, they don't know the first thing about the application area. Then you take it on, you know, you want to bring it into another space. You need to then get experts in that space to build it. So for AI to really take off, there has to be a whole plethora of people from a lot of different range of skills to make this happen. It will not just be engineers and technical people that will do that. So in my mind, I think it's the AI skills gap we have to figure out about which ones will not require the deep technical, and that people can help transition into this area within the public service and in private sector to support it, because there will be business analysts, there'll be so many people that will support this industry, and we need to get away from thinking it's technical people, you know, because it is, but it's not just.
Yeah. Building on that, John, that whole skills pipeline, we've had quite a number of questions through Slido all morning, so thank you to our audience, because it has been a theme that has cropped up in all of the conversations this morning. How do you attract talent with this skill set into the public sector? Go. Thoughts?
With great difficulty.
Yeah.
No, seriously, and I think Patricia has hit on where you need to go. There's an element of retraining. There are lots of jobs. We don't all have to be AI engineers. I think business analysis and subject matter expertise is almost as important as the AI piece. But in terms of recruiting in those kind of specialist skills, to a large extent, the public sector is not going to be able to do it. And the market is changing too quickly. I don't think it makes sense to do it. I think what you need to do is buy it. So, but that entails a different set of skills. In terms of managing external vendors or contractors or whatever you want to call them, and indeed having the procurement process around that, and being very specific about what you're getting them in to do. So it comes back to understanding the problem, what AI are we trying to apply, where, understanding the amount of work involved in that, and then buying in the specialists, because it's a changing market, and I think it'll continue to change at pace. Over time, you'll build up a level of expertise and skill, and it's probably enough just to be able to manage it, but not necessarily to be able to code in it. I haven't coded in years, probably was never very good anyway, but you know, you don't have to be able to do it all yourself, and you shouldn't try. So I would think, you know, it's a different type of public-private partnership. It's not a partnership, it's a contractual arrangement. We're buying in these experts, they're going to help us with this. And all of the big, particularly all the big cloud vendors and the big IT companies, they're more than willing to work with organizations on this and put in place, you know, some level of contractual arrangement to buy in the service. That's where I think we should be going. But we do need to look at retaining the right talent and recruiting the right talent. And that's an ongoing problem. You know, people are short.
And when you look at, let's say, the Collison brothers who, you know, are investing in Limerick University, they're trying to think about the future pipeline for their own tech industry here in Ireland. Like, you're right, you're going to need those contractors. But is there an alternative as well in terms of going back to internships, creating the pipeline through the schooling system. But that probably is going to require a little bit of a rebranding, back to what David talked about earlier. Like, this is purposeful work. Is that the connection that needs to be drawn now, that maybe hasn't been there enough?
We run internships every year. We have done for probably the last 10 years. We take in 6 or 8 interns a year. We've also worked with FIT, and FIT were mentioned earlier. And I think that concept of apprenticeships, the apprenticeship model for IT, is probably unexplored fully. That we should be saying to young people leaving school, like, there's lots and lots of jobs in technology. You don't have to be a coder. Like, there's so many different jobs in IT, be it business analysis, project management, network security, coding, database administrator, email administrator, systems administrator. There's a whole platter of jobs. You don't have to have a degree necessarily, but you can train people in those jobs as apprentice. And that will bring more people into the industry, more girls into the industry. We need to attract more women in. I think they're all things that we should be working on actively.
You're hearing a lot of private sector talking about this as well, the lack of degrees. They're going, why are we fixating on degrees?
Yeah.
It is actually cutting off a huge
Barriers.
workforce. You start changing your attitude about that, you might be able to start filling those roles.
Yeah, more flexibility and scope. Great, thank you for all of that. I'd love to go, we've been keeping an eye on Slido questions there and building them in. Anyone in the audience got a question, put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. Go on, don't be shy. Have we got someone here? Oh yeah, great, thank you.
Interesting and very applicable to the work we do right now with all of the public sector. So my question was more towards data linking and building distributed data platforms. One of your case studies, Luna, there about Helsinki doing it. How do we remove or tackle the red tape and privacy policies, or rather make those more informative, so that the time that gets spent in actually enabling these data platforms to work together can be minimized and optimized? Are there examples you could share? It'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And that's for Lena, is it? Primarily. Great, Lena.
Yeah, so how long time do we have? No, I think you're pointing to a relevant question around privacies and the considerations that have to be made. I think we are seeing those who are quite mature in these areas have already categorized the data, worked with the data, and can have relevant discussions on what kind of data it is. And I think that is an important thing to do when you get down to these data platforms. But that is also why Helsinki decided to actually split it up in more distributed way, because there are some areas that are causing absolutely no privacy discussions, no topics, so those can move faster while they keep working with some of the more challenging scenarios in the background. So these are discussions that needs to be done, but I would really encourage you to categorize your data and make sure that you have the right discussion on the right types of data, because then we see for those customers across Europe who's doing that, normally they're able to move a bit faster and actually do more than they thought they could do when they started doing the assessment.
Great, thank you for the question. John, a question for you on Slido. Revenue are the experts in AI. Should the civil public service not work with Revenue to learn the AI technology rather than individually reinvent the wheel? There's a compliment in there and a question.
Well, thanks very much. I wouldn't claim that we're the experts. We've done some stuff with AI and we have plans to do more. And certainly, look, we're always willing to help anyone else who's interested. But everybody's business in the public sector is different. So I think you'd mentioned it's important you have to understand the problem you're trying to solve and understand, you know, the area that you're working in. And Revenue won't know what area you're working in, but we can certainly help people, if they have questions around the technology or ideas about how to go about implementing things or things to watch out for, and we're always open and willing to make ourselves available to anybody to do that. And if there are examples maybe where, going back to the shared data, maybe there are opportunities there where we could work with other agencies on processes that could be shared, maybe using AI, but we'd have to look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you for that, Pádraig. A quick one for you from Slido. I think it's directed to you, but others can jump in. Is AI being used to provide more user-centred services in different languages, e.g. Irish, Ukrainian, etc.? Thinking of the IRIS chatbot, for example.
Oh God, I think that's maybe more for John than for me. But within our world, obviously, I mean, our view around AI and ML is we'll use it where it's going to add value and where it's going to allow us to extract insight from data. And I suppose that's really the focus for us. I think as John was saying, like, we all have different tasks, but you actually have to know what your problem is and you have to know what problem you're trying to solve. I think that's really, really important. Can I just come back to the previous question about the platform? Some of the platforms already exist, by the way. We already have a platform in place where we provide access to integrated and linked data for research purposes to accredited researchers, and we did it throughout COVID actually to Philip Nolan and his team. You know, we were taking 7 data sources on a daily basis, we were linking and integrating them in the background, and then we were creating that research microdata file, and through our legislation giving access to the modeling team. So some of these platforms are already in place, but you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing, and you have to think about what you're trying to fix.
Great, thank you. John, anything you wanted to add there?
Just on the language support, well, obviously, as I outlined, typically these things are cloud provided. Irish language support is a problem. Ukrainian language support, I'm not sure. Polish and Romanian, those sort of languages are there. But it comes back to the problem you're trying to solve. And all of these things cost money. All of these systems need to be maintained. If you want to provide, technically, there's no difficulty in providing these services in other languages. It just has to be prioritized, and that's a business call.
Great, thank you, Lena.
Maybe I can give you a challenge then on language, because when you work in a big company like Microsoft, you get some emails from Corp, and not all of them are very interesting. But one day we got one, and the National Technology Officer in Norway came to me and he said, Lena, it's this email around speech to text. And they want to know what's the next country after, you know, English and French and Spanish. And he said, why shouldn't that be us? And I said, okay, how are you planning to do that? And he said, I'll just call our National Library, because we've been recording in our parliament for 20 years. And there's all kinds of dialects. So he called them and they said, wow, that's a cool project, let's do it. So we trained our algorithms on the Norwegian language based on all those recordings from the parliament. And we were actually the top 5 language that came from speech to text. And we announced that in a room like this with a lot of teachers. And you know, many of them started crying because it means so much to the students. So I would challenge you. There are also, when Norway can be language number 5, Irish can also make it to the list.
We will take that challenge. Thank you, Lena.